For nearly 20 years, Elias Crow lived where the Arizona Territory faded into raw, unforgiving land. His farm sat alone beneath an endless sky, surrounded by dry wind, cracked earth, and the echoes of a life that once had warmth. Long ago, laughter had filled the small wooden house, his wife's gentle voice, the soft running of children's feet, but sickness and loss had taken them all, leaving Elias with nothing but the land and the habit of survival. He rose before dawn each day, worked until the sun burned low, and spoke to no one except his animals and the wind that never answered back. In the nearby town of Red Hollow, people whispered about him. They called him the ghost farmer, a man who came only when he had to and vanished before anyone could ask questions. One afternoon, driven by the need for supplies, Elias rode into town and sensed unease in the air. A trader caravan had arrived late, drawing a restless crowd. Dust hung thick as voices buzzed with cruel curiosity. Near the wagons stood a woman unlike the others, set apart as if the ground itself refused her company. She was Apache, her wrists loosely bound, her clothes worn, her face marked by exhaustion but not defeat. The trader spoke loudly, boasting as though she were nothing more than livestock. He claimed she was the last of her people, abandoned by a world that had no place for her. Some laughed, others turned away. The woman did neither. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, steady and unbroken. Elias felt something twist in his chest. He had known loss, though of a different kind, and the familiarity of it unsettled him. He listened as men discussed her fate casually, weighing her worth in coins and convenience. No one spoke of choice. No one spoke of mercy. Elias left town without buying supplies, but the woman's stare followed him all the way back to his farm, haunting his thoughts as the night stretched long and restless. He sat alone at his table, turning memories over like stones, until silence itself felt like an accusation. At dawn, Elias returned to Red Hollow with a pouch of hard-earned money and a decision he did not fully understand, only felt. The exchange was brief and bitter. The trader grinned as if he had won something. When Elias cut the rope from the woman's wrists, she recoiled slightly, unsure whether this was another cruelty disguised as kindness. Elias did not speak. He simply stepped back and gestured toward his horse, leaving her space, leaving her the dignity of distance. The ride out of town was quiet. He knew freedom could not be proven with words. It had to be shown. When they reached his farm, he pointed to a small cabin near the edge of the property and told her she could stay or leave whenever she chose. There would be no orders, no chains. As the sun dipped low and the land swallowed their shadows, Elias realized that for the first time in years, the first night passed without words. Elias stayed in the main house, listening to unfamiliar sounds, the crackle of a second fire, soft movement near the small cabin, the presence of another soul on land that had known only him for years. He did not approach. He understood that trust, once broken by the world, could not be rebuilt in a single gesture. Before dawn, he rose as always, preparing for the day as if nothing had changed. Yet everything felt different. When he stepped outside, he noticed smoke already rising from the cabin chimney. She was awake. She had chosen, at least for now, to remain. Days unfolded carefully like steps across thin ice. The Apache woman spoke little, and when she did, her words came slowly, shaped by a language Elias did not know. He learned instead to read her silences. She fetched water without being asked, repaired a broken fence with skill born of survival, and watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. Elias made no demands. He left food near her door, tools where she could find them, and distance enough to breathe. He sensed that any attempt to control, even with kindness, would shatter the fragile peace between them. The land itself seemed to notice her presence. She walked the fields differently, touching the soil as if greeting an old friend, studying the plants Elias had long dismissed as useless. One afternoon, she showed him how certain roots could be boiled into medicine, how leaves he had trampled underfoot could ease pain and fever. Elias listened, surprised by how willingly he accepted her knowledge. He realized he had been surviving the land, not living with it. At night, memories crept in for both of them. Elias dreamed of voices he had buried long ago, while she sat beneath the stars, whispering prayers to ancestors whose names the wind carried away. Sometimes their paths crossed near the well or the corral, and for a moment they would stand in shared stillness, neither bowing nor turning away. There was no gratitude spoken, no apology offered, only mutual recognition. 2 lives shaped by loss, moving forward because stopping was not an option. Slowly, fragments of understanding formed. She told him her name was Naeli, speaking it with quiet pride. Elias repeated it clumsily, earning a faint smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. In return, he told her his own name, something he had not spoken aloud in days. The sound of it felt strange, almost fragile, as if naming himself again made him real. One evening, as the sky burned red with sunset, Elias realized he was no longer counting the hours in silence. He was listening for footsteps, for the crackle of her fire, for signs that another human presence still shared the land with him. Naeli remained cautious, wounded by a world that had taken everything from her. Yet she stood unbroken, and Elias, once convinced he was finished with life beyond endurance. The trouble came the way it always did on the, frontier, announced by dust and the sound of approaching hooves. Elias saw them first from the ridge above his fields. 3 riders cutting across the plain with purpose, not passing through, not lost. His body stiffened with an instinct he hadn't needed in years. He glanced toward the cabin. Naeli stood in the doorway, already aware, her posture calm but alert, like a bow pulled tight. The men arrived without greeting. They were from Red Hollow, their faces familiar in the way bad memories are. One of them spat in the dirt and claimed they'd come to collect what was rightfully theirs. He spoke of money lost, of deals undone, of a woman who had been paid for and taken away. His words carried the confidence of men used to being obeyed. Elias answered quietly. He said no one on his land belonged to anyone else. He said there would be no collection. His hand rested near his rifle, not in threat but in readiness. The men laughed, mocking the idea that a lone farmer could stand against them. Behind Elias, Naeli stepped forward. She did not hide. She did not lower her eyes. She spoke in her own language, her voice sharp and steady, carrying the weight of a people nearly erased. Though Elias understood none of the words, he felt their meaning strike like heat. This was not fear. This was defiance. The riders shifted uneasily. They had expected silence, submission, anything but this unbroken fire. One man reached for his gun. The moment stretched thin. Elias fired first, not to kill but to warn, sending a bullet into the dirt inches from the man's boot. The sound cracked across the fields like thunder. Naeli did not flinch. The men hesitated, suddenly aware of how far they were from town. How alone they truly were. Pride faltered where certainty had once lived. After a tense standoff, they retreated, muttering threats that sounded hollow even to themselves. Dust swallowed them as quickly as it had announced them. The land fell silent again, but it was a different silence now, charged, alive. That night, Naeli spoke more than she ever had before. Her English came in broken fragments stitched together with pauses and gestures. She told Elias of her village burned in a dawn attack, of family lost, names carried only in memory, of being traded from camp to camp, surviving because surrender meant death of the spirit. Elias listened without interrupting, without trying to soften the truth. He understood that pain did not need fixing. It needed witnessing. When she finished, the fire between them burned low. Elias realized something fundamental had shifted. Naeli was not someone he had saved. She had saved herself again and again, and he had merely stepped aside long enough to let her keep standing. In that understanding, respect took root, deep, unspoken, and stronger than fear. The seasons turned quietly, as if the land itself had decided to give them time. Summer softened into fall, and the farm began to change in ways Elias had never seen before. Naeli planted crops guided by old knowledge, seeds chosen with care, arranged in harmony with the soil rather than forced against it. Where the ground had once yielded only enough to survive, it now gave more, as if responding to being understood at last. Elias worked beside her, not as a master of the land, but as a partner learning to listen. They spoke more easily now. Words were still few, but they were no longer cautious. Elias taught Naeli how to read the weather in the color of the sky, how settlers marked time by stars and shadows. In return, she showed him which plants healed and which warned of danger, how to move across the land without exhausting it. 2 histories once bound by conflict found space to exist side by side. There was no attempt to erase the past, only an effort not to repeat it. News from Red Hollow faded into rumor, then into nothing at all. The men who had ridden out never returned. Perhaps fear had reached them, or perhaps shame had. Either way, the farm remained undisturbed. What stayed was quieter and far more powerful. routine shared without obligation, respect without debt. Nayeli was never watched, never questioned. She stayed because she chose to, and that choice was renewed every day. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the plains in golden fire, Nayeli approached the porch with something in her hands. It was a small piece of carved wood marked with Apache symbols, worn smooth by time. She placed it carefully beside the door, a sign of trust, of belonging, of a place claimed not by force but by presence. Elias did not touch it at first. He only nodded, understanding the weight of what had been given. The ghost farmer slowly disappeared from Red Hollow's memory. In his place stood a man who no longer lived only to endure. Laughter returned in small, unexpected moments. Silence, once a burden, became a shared comfort. Nayeli, the last of her people in the eyes of the world, was no longer alone, and yet she had lost none of herself. As night fell and the stars spread across the sky, the land held their names without judgment, not as owner and owned, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two survivors who had found, in the vast emptiness of the frontier, a way to let life continue with dignity.